Welcome back to OpenLine. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Carrie Sharp. I'm joined by Dr. Marisa Richmond from MTSU. We are talking about the history of Pride Month. Just had a great conversation for the past 10 minutes about it, really going through the last half century of progress and how this all started. I do want to remind folks this is OpenLine. It's your chance to call in, share your own experiences, or ask Dr. Richmond some questions if you would like. That's your opportunity to do that. 615-737-PLUS is the number. It's at the bottom of the screen. I do want to talk about something that I think that we have seen with Pride Month. We've also seen it with like Breast Cancer Awareness Month, is really the corporate onslaught that has come with it, especially as of late. I don't know, maybe in the last 5-10 years when it comes to Pride Month, maybe longer. There are some pros and cons to that, some good and some pushback when it comes to it.
Yeah, well, one of the things, they provide money, and we need money. And a lot of us have worked hard with many of those companies for years to open those doors, not just for people to get into those jobs, but not to be fired when they come out of the closet, to be promoted. And as I said, you know, we want to be in the boardroom. We want to be where those decisions are made. And so, but some of the complaints have been targeted, particularly at those companies that continue to put money into campaigns for politicians that try to deny us our rights. And so that's where a lot of that controversy comes from. You know, but
kind of like when a corporation wants to have one foot on each side of the line.
Correct.
You know, we want to be associated with Pride Month to make this population happy,
right,
but we're also going to work on this side of things to push laws that would maybe be seen as anti-LGBTQ.
Correct. And so, you know, I've been critical of certain companies in the past that have been part of Pride and are out there, you know, denying us opportunities or donating money to anti-LGBTQ candidates. And so I do think that it is important that we vet those companies, but recognize that we need them. People need to work. We all have bills to pay. And especially now as inflation is going up, so there's more pressure on us than ever before. We want those employment opportunities, and those companies who are willing to hire us, to showcase us and promote us, then I think they should be welcomed.
You are speaking from a perspective, you say we and us.
Yes.
I wonder about, through your history, your career, what kind of opposition or discrimination that you have faced? Well,
directly, the only thing I really had a problem with was when I transitioned and I lost my health care. And it took me a while to get health insurance back, and as you get older, that becomes more and more important. And so the Affordable Care Act finally put an end to that discrimination. I was finally able to gain access to health care again because of that. I've not faced it in terms of job discrimination on a direct basis, but as you were saying, you know, I've heard things. I've heard people make some very disparaging remarks, maybe not about me, but just in general, even before I came out of the closet, and made me question their ideals. And I continue to hear people and see people post things on social media that I find appalling. I know a lot of people say, if someone says this, I'm going to unfriend them. I generally don't, unless they post it on my page. But if they're posting it on their page, they have the right to. And so I monitor them. I want to see what other hateful things they're saying, because I need to know what they're doing so that I can sort of, you know, counter that in some way.
That's an interesting way to go about things. That's not the way most people do it. It's kind of the cancel culture. You're kind of doing the opposite.
Yeah. I think it's important to be at least aware of what the other side is saying.
In this, not in the same vein, but when we're talking about people who may not agree with the LGBTQ lifestyle, or may not understand it, may not know much about it, I don't know. When we talk about Pride Month, what would your message be to heterosexuals or people who don't know much about the LGBTQ lifestyle? What should be our participation in Pride Month?
First off, it's open to everyone. Everyone is welcome. And there's a lot of diversity. We're not just one single group. So come out and see our diversity. Get to know the people from your life. You know, you have family members, maybe it's a coworker, and to say, you know, I'd like to sit down and, you know, go out, have a cup of coffee, have a drink, share a pizza, and let's just talk and share. I'd like to learn about your life. And when you start to learn about people, the fear factor starts to disappear. because as long as we are distant, as long that allows other people to demonize us, and I think it's important, then I think you begin to understand and appreciate the importance of pride.
Yeah, and the barriers start to come down a little bit, those self-imposed barriers.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Right. Yeah. For people who may not know the long history of this, we were talking earlier about the half century, the 50 years since the Stonewall riots, 50 years plus now. We're working past that, which is unbelievable. Yeah, but this really all started even before that. I mean, that was the monumental moment, but there were some issues before that as well.
Well, as I pointed out, I mean, we had riots in Los Angeles in 59, Philadelphia 65, San Francisco 66. You know, the issues in those cities were the same as they were in New York. Coming out of World War II, a lot of people, of course, that was when the ban on gays in the military was instituted, pushed by, of all people, J. Edgar Hoover. So he was himself a very closeted gay man. But what happened is, you know, unit commanders said, I want people who are going to help us defeat the Nazis. And there were a lot of people from our community who did that, and they were allowed to serve. And so they came home and they started getting organized. They're creating political groups. They started opening bars all over the country. Prior to, you know, Prohibition, we don't know how many bars existed during Prohibition. There were probably only about a dozen cities that had bars that we know of. But coming out of the war, they just exploded all over the country, including Nashville. And so we start to see the origins of community organizing from that. But there was the police harassment that I was talking about, and that's what led to this anger and frustration and this pushback from the communities at all of these places leading up to the Stonewall moment, which was kind of iconic.
And June has always been, as we celebrate Pride Month and when the Stonewall riots happened, a significant month. And I was reading about some of the most historic Supreme Court rulings we've had just lately regarding gay marriage. And traditionally, Supreme Court rulings come out in June, early July. But again, June is that month, and we've had some very significant rulings that have really changed things for our country.
Yeah, I remember the marriage equality ruling came out in 2015, the day before Nashville Pride.
Oh, really?
And so that came out on a Friday, and we marched downtown on Saturday, and people were just cheering and celebrating. And I gave the kickoff address at that particular Pride, and I said, you know, we deserve the right to celebrate, but let's remember the fight's not over. We still have a lot more to do. And we've seen additional rulings, especially what's known generically as well, it was the Title VII cases. There were 3 of them, 2 involving sexual orientation and 1 for gender identity. But these 3 cases said that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 covers all LGBT people, banning discrimination in the workplace. So that was another huge step forward that came out in June, although not the day before Pride. I forget the exact day it was announced. But that was another huge moment that even in states like Tennessee, where there is so much hostility, the fact is that we are now covered by federal law in the workplace.
What do you see as the main, I don't want to say arguments, but the main issues right now for people who are in the LGBTQ community? Lifestyle-wise, what are you up against day in, day out? What matters? Well,
what we're seeing right now, most of the focus seems to have shifted to the trans community and to transgendered youth. These bans on access to health care, and of course, trans athletes, even though, you know, you might see 1 state champion per state, maybe. And then, of course, the criminalization of teaching. One of those laws that they passed this year criminalizes the teaching of so-called divisive concepts in higher education. And as I was saying in the introduction, I teach LGBTQ studies. I teach African American history. And even when I actually brought that up in my African American class, because that was what I was teaching this particular semester. And even beyond that, in my general survey classes, I'm teaching women's history. I'm teaching, you know, religious history and hostility against Catholics and Jews, and more recently Muslims, and nativism against immigrants in general. And of course, the hostility against Native Americans and how their cultures were crushed and destroyed, and their children taken away and sent to these schools where we're now finding these mass graves. And so, you know, that's what we teach. But for some people, that is divisive, and that's criminal, and that's become criminal in Tennessee. And I consider that insulting. I consider it outrageous. And so all of what we teach in talking about diversity and talking about the unique challenges that we face in this country and overcoming systemic racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and everything else, that's part of our history, and we need to learn that so we don't keep making those mistakes.
With this new law, have you gone back and said, I've got to look at my lesson plans? Or have you said...
What I told him, I said, I'm not changing anything. I said, I'm going to keep doing this, but I want you to know what our state legislature is doing. And this is going to affect you. And I point out that, moving on after college, it's possible that some of these fields, some of these disciplines might decertify our programs in Tennessee. And that's going to make it harder for you to move on to a graduate program. It may make it harder for you to get employed, because someone might say, well, we don't recognize a Tennessee degree anymore because of what your state has done. And so this is going to affect them as well as me.
And it's interesting that what is happening in the classroom, or what is being trying to be prohibited in the classroom, you think you go to college to prepare yourself for the real world. And if you go into the real world blind of, like you said, what you're going to encounter in the workplace, have you really gotten the education you deserve and that you have paid a lot of money for?
Correct.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, we're going to take another quick break. It is already that time. We're going to come up on the half hour pretty soon. We are talking about Pride Month, the history of it. Hope you'll stick around.